Okay, let's get started on this painting of shadows on snow. More often than not, I begin a painting with the ground of a color. On this painting, I decided to begin with a warm yellow-orange. I'm using a large 2-inch brush and putting the paint on in a haphazard manner. I've decided to use white chalk to do my drawing. On occasion, I'll use pencil or acrylic pens, but the chalk seemed to be a good option for this painting. To begin, I place the horizon line that diagonal along the back of the painting and then put in the pathway. This pathway creates a perspective design, and that's the primary design for this piece, followed by diagonal. As usual, I've placed third lines on both my photographic reference and onto my canvas surface. Here I am filling in the shadow marks with chalk to make it less confusing as I make all these different puzzle pieces. I place enough drawing marks onto my surface to make me confident to begin the painting. Here's the final drawing, and here's the Stay Wet palette that I use, showing the different colors and the tools that I used during this process. I'm using quinacridone magenta to place where the shadows are going to go. My goal is to create something called a no tan, which means dark light in Japanese, and I'm giving myself the pattern that will happen with the light shining on the snow. While I'm placing these red areas, I am aware of the thick and thinness of these lines, as well as the spaces between these red areas. I've used a 50-50 mix of paint and GAC 500 while placing this red. This gives me more time to scratch into the paint and to make these graffito marks using my color shaper. These marks will be the little sticks sticking out of the snow in various places. Painting in this way is called negative space painting, so we're painting between the different trees that we see. When you do this, it creates a more painterly effect and also allows your decision of how much of that orange background you want to leave. And it also creates some interesting effects by the end of the painting. Continue to create interesting intervals between the red and the orange that's left behind. Also, as you go along, in general, do slightly narrower marks in the background and more wide marks in the foreground. This helps to create a little bit more perspective and depth in your painting. Also, as you place these marks, whether you're using a palette knife or a brush, keep moving your hand around to have a different direction of your brush marks. This will look much more interesting than just going straight across with your brush. Now that the no-tan pattern of snow shadows are created, I am now putting in the yellow areas for the vertical trees. When I do trees like this, I allow my brush marks to go horizontally and vertically within these shapes. I'm using broken color so that I'm not filling these shapes in completely, but allowing little spaces in between. This keeps things looking a little more interesting as I go. Again, this is just blocking in, creating a first layer so that I have a blueprint to follow for placing all my other colors. Just as I did with the snow, I'm creating narrower and wider marks and being very aware of the negative space intervals between these tree trunks. Once I've placed the majority of the tree trunks, I'm going into the pathway. I'm putting my first layer of paint, which is Pyrrole Orange, and while it's still wet, scratching in with the color shaper. While I have the Pyrrole Orange, I'm going to darken between the tree trunks. One of my goals for this painting is to create interesting marks and texture, so for many of these spaces that I'm placing now, I'm scratching in again with that color shaper just to remove some of the paint. This creates a multi-layered effect. Using quinacridone magenta, I'm adding pathway shadows. Now that I have my shadows placed in the snow and I've established where the tree trunks are, I'm going to go in and start placing down some of the light areas of snow. I chose ultramarine blue because it is a blue-violet color sitting next to violet on the color wheel. And because I'll be using violet, or if you want to call it purple colors within the painting, they will be pleasing together as they're adjacent or analogous. Secondarily, I chose ultramarine blue for its graying nature when titanium white is added to it. Historical colors are like this, so if you were to take a viridian color and add white to it, you can see the grayness that happens there as well. I like the idea of this gray or blue that will happen against the yellow whites of the snow. As you can see in this detail photo, I'm continuing to scratch into the wet paint with the color shaper. I will continue this using the ultramarine blue and white throughout the snow areas until I feel done, and also continuing with the scratch marks. My goal here is to have varied shades as I go. I consider that this is the underpainting. I know that I will be putting several layers of other colors on top of this later in the painting stages. I'm making small, tiny marks in the background to make it look more distant, and as you can see, going a little bit wider in the front areas. I continue to move my palette knife in different directions to keep all the marks interesting and energetic. I highly recommend that you practice negative space drawing and this type of painting where you paint in the negative spaces. Negative space drawing is very right brain, so it helps to do this kind of thing and get into your visual space of your mind, which also helps you get into the flow. While I have dioxazine violet, I'm going in and darkening on the shadow side of the trees, using fun marks with the color shaper and pulling my palette knife sideways, and going vertical thinner marks as well. The goal is variety and texture. To further darken the path, I'm taking quinacridone red and some of that GAC 500 and further glazing. This glaze will darken as it dries. I see I need to darken the negative spaces between the tree trunks a little bit more, so I'm going to use that same quinacridone red. I've decided to start adding some variety of color to the snow, so I'm taking quinacridone magenta and titanium white and putting it over top of the ultramarine blue areas. The secret with this type of painting is not to completely cover up what's underneath. The scratching in and kind of scumbling way of painting will allow this to happen. At this stage, I'm playing between the magenta and the ultramarine blue colors, getting a placement of color and trying to find that nice balance. Once I've done that, I'm going to my titanium white and adding a tiny touch of nickel azo yellow to warm up the white, and further lightening the snow where the sun is hitting it. I'm going to further adjust my darks using the dioxazine purple, and I've added that GAC 500 to make it nice and thin. So I'm adding it as a glaze and scratching in as I go. I like to have cadmium orange on my palette for making corrections in a painting particularly like this one. It's an opaque color and it's very bright, so I can add it into the painting and cover up anything that I don't want to show underneath. I feel like I'm ready to put in the lit side of the trees, so with the titanium white, to which I have added that nickel azo yellow, I'm using broken marks on the side of the trees. Here's a close-up of what it ends up being like. I'm going to use lots of broken color and glazes to make this happen. To make this opaque enough, I'm putting the paint on quite thickly. This will be the lightest shade on my painting, along with bits in the snow. This glaze of quinacridone red will further darken the negative space between the trees while keeping us in the red-orange family. At this stage, I'm going to work between my highlights and my shadows to get a balance going. I'm adding little tiny marks for the distant tree trunks and a little bit bigger marks for the foreground trees. I keep a moist paper towel in my hand as I place down this glaze of nickel azo yellow. So I like to put the color down fairly thickly and then wipe it back to a little bit lighter. I'm also placing a very thin glaze of yellow over the whites of the snow. I know I'll further add some bits of pink and of orange into this, so this is just the first layer of glazing on the snow. As I was painting, I felt like the two left side trees were leaning a little bit to the left, and with the strong diagonal force of the line from the top to the left, I thought I would add in a counterforce to those two trees. So I'll be adding in a little short stump of a trunk that will lean into those two trees. Also, I decided to add a yellow-orange bush on the right-hand side to balance out some of those yellow-orange colors throughout the painting. In hindsight, it would have been a great idea to have scratched through that blue paint to the orange background earlier on. That is a mistake of not completely planning out a design before I even start doing a painting. Even though I had it overall done, I can see that I hadn't figured out completely my color balance. Here's that counterweight trunk leaning into those two trees and also helping us to move back into the painting despite that strong diagonal horizon line. Just for fun, I thought I'd give Cobalt Teal a try. This is a blue-green, which is a very cool color, and it lives very wonderfully with any kind of violet. Here I'm whiting out an area that will be a bright yellow bush. Sometimes I use a pointed Q-tip or my color shaper to scrape off paint. Here's a distant bush after it's been glazed with nickel azo yellow. I'm putting a little bit of a sky hole back here with a bit of violet and white mixed together. Now's the time to make a few more adjustments using all the colors I've been using all along. I'm looking for tonal value balance, color shifts, making sure that all the colors of blue, violets, reds, and oranges balance with each other. My intention is to keep this painting overall warm, so I'm re-adding the nickel azo glaze onto the snow, and again wiping off as I did before to mellow it back. I've mixed a mid-tone color using ultramarine blue and titanium white. This sky I'm adding to the top does double duty. Besides the sky, it's creating the shapes of the trees below. Another thing that this blue mid-tone does is bring some of the blues up into the top of the painting to balance all the blue colors we have down in the snow. Here I've decided to add some more ultramarine blue and white on top of the violet areas of the snow shadows. Here is the final painting. I made some more changes that aren't shown on video, so I'll show you here by slideshow. The first change I made was I added a little bit of violet into the shadows on the pathway just to bring some blue into it, and I put some orange marks into the right hand side to balance things out. And on the snow I've added little bits of tinted orange just to warm things up. I think we're done. Have fun with this one. Oh, P.S. I also lightened the tree in the back of the pathway. Okay, we're done. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe for notice of new videos. Take care.